Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is definitely a wonderful pleasure to be here this morning. It is a marvelous opportunity to stand in front of such a good group of people. Marvelous to be able to come together to worship and praise our God. I would encourage you to go to the last book of Scripture, Revelation chapter 21, and we're going to notice the very last verse of that chapter, and then we will go from there into the beginning of chapter 22. In Revelation 21, verse 27, there shall in no wise enter into it anything unclean, or that maketh an abomination a lie, but only they that are written in the Lamb's book of life. And he showed me a river of water of life, bright as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and the Lamb. And in the midst of the street thereof, and on this side of the river and on that, was the tree of life, bearing 12 manner of fruits, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no curse any more, and the throne of God and the Lamb shall be therein, and his servants shall serve him. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be written on their foreheads. And there shall be no night there, and they need no light of lamp, neither light of sun, for the Lord God shall give them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. Let's talk about the day of going to heaven. Getting to heaven is a subject that I would say, of many subjects, probably one of the top 5 that you would like to talk about. At least I would hope so. But at the day of your funeral, when that comes, and there's a person that's standing in front of the audience that's there, delivering a eulogy about your life, would they make a statement that would say, he or she is going to heaven? Could they even say that about you? Is that possible? Well, it is definitely possible, but would that actually be the case? And if you notice in the text, as is stated, the last verse of chapter 21, and even into the things that are stated in chapter 22, there will not be anything unclean or that is an abomination and a lie that will be there. And you could go back to chapter 21 and you could look at verse 8 and talk about all those other people that may fall in that same list, along with all the liars, which are the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and fornicators and sorcerers. And the list goes rather long as to who the unclean are, but the unclean is a very clear heading that describes for you who will not be in heaven. And I would say many of us probably realize that. We know that. That's pretty simple. Well, when you go back to the book of 1 John, I want you to notice something with me in the 1 John chapter 3, of where there is this anticipation of the people that want to go to heaven. It is a long-term goal, but then when you look at the book of 1 John chapter 3, verse 3, he says that he talks about what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we are called children of God. And then he says in verse 3, everyone that has this hope set on him purifies himself even as he is pure. If you take all the uncleanness and that which is defiled away from heaven, what you've got is purity. You got beauty in its holiness. You've got this really wonderful picture and image of what it would be like to be there. And those people that have this desire of getting to heaven, according to chapter 3 of the book of 1 John, verse 3, they have this hope set on them. And as a result of that, they purify themselves here. Therefore, it makes very good sense to know and understand that when you get to this description in Revelation chapter 21 of heaven, where there is no unclean thing there, then the implication is there is purity, beauty, holiness, everything that's marvelous and glorious and majestic that is there. But more specifically, the idea of purity that is there. The person that has found themselves to the point that they're interested and have this desire of getting to heaven will not only purify themselves, but it goes back before that. When you go to the book of Romans chapter 12 and you notice the statement that is made in verse 1, I beg you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service. What Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and verse 2 just explains how it is that this holy sacrifice at which we give ourselves in all that we have is a spiritual service. Some versions use the word spiritual worship. To be the people who will be in heaven where there is nothing unclean, there is no corruption, there is no sin, no defilement, then that individual who has this expectation is going to devote themselves to the purity of their life before they get to the purity of being in heaven. If you go back to the book of Revelation chapter 4, there's this throne scene that is there. And in this throne scene, there are all those people that are surrounding the throne that are serving. That's exactly what you got in Revelation chapter 22 and verse 3. There's this service that is rendered to the one that is there at the throne. And the people that get to be there are the people that have already purified themselves here before they get to the purified place in the holiness and glory of heaven. So therefore, we find ourselves in a covenant relationship with God to be people who will purify ourselves while we're here to be able to get to where there is this pure, holy place forever and ever. There have been some people, though, that don't really seem to connect the idea of purity here with the purity there. But the purity of what's in heaven has its connection with what we do in worship here. For we will be serving and we will be worshiping there forever and ever. Some of you may already know that. Some of you may have already understood that. But biblically, there are some real good examples for us to understand and value that helps us pretty well clearly see this connection of purity and worship here is going to lead to purity and worship there. And it has a lot to do with what we're already doing in our life. In the book of Genesis chapter 4, you may remember and have studied this instance where there is this sacrifice that's made. And I want you to know this. There are brothers that are making sacrifice. Both brothers, Cain and Abel, are making sacrifice. There is a statement that is made about the offering of the sacrifice of Cain in verse 4. It's the fruit of the ground. The one that Abel offers in verse 4 is the firstlings of the flock. Now, right after this, there is this statement that is made by Jehovah. Jehovah has respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. Statement that is made in the book of Hebrews chapter 11 verse 4 helps you understand about why it was that Abel did what he did. He did what he did by faith. And as a result of him offering what he offered to God by faith, there's also a statement that is made in verse 4 of Hebrews chapter 11 that says, he being dead yet speaks. And it's not only the idea of he being dead yet speaks is what he did, or what he did in living is living by faith, but it's also his offering of his sacrifice. It's his matter of worship to God is in purity. It is in holiness. It is in faith to what God asked of him to be versus what Cain did. Now, here's an interesting thing that you must understand. What kind of impact will Cain's worship and Abel's worship have upon them in their life? All right, let's just put you and I in that scenario. Here we are, we're worshiping the Lord together. What impact will this worship be toward you as you go from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this coming week? What happened in this case, Cain was very wroth in verse 5, and his countenance fell at the end of verse 5. And then in verse 8, Cain told Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and he slew him. The impact of his worship and what it did to him impacted his daily life, to the point that his life became to be impure because he killed his brother. He killed his brother. You can't tell me that what you do here doesn't impact what you're going to do out there tomorrow or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. Therefore, if your life is defiled, then your worship is going to be defiled. If your worship is defiled, then your life is going to be defiled. If it is unclean in your worship, then you're going to be unclean in all that you do in your daily life. The same thing happens in this case. Purity of worship has its greatest value when we are already purified, as 1 John 3 verse 3 says, in all that we do every day. But let's go further. Let's talk about this one in the book of Leviticus chapter 10. You may have read this story as well, or this event that happened with this man by the name of Nadab and Abihu, where they're going to make an offering, a sacrifice, an opportunity to worship, as is stated in chapter 10 of the book of Leviticus in verse 1, where they are together, Nadab and Abihu, brothers again, part of a family. The sons of Aaron took each of them a censer, put fire therein, laid incense upon it, and offered strange fire before Jehovah, which he had not commanded them. And there came forth fire from before Jehovah and devoured them, and they died before Jehovah. Then Moses said to Aaron, this it is that Jehovah spoke, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. There is a connection between what God wanted done and being sanctified and what Nadab and Abihu actually did. If you go to the book of Leviticus chapter 16, you will notice they had a fire to be offered, but according to what is stated in verse 12, he shall take a censer full of coals of fire from off the altar of Jehovah, and his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil. He tells you where the fire is supposed to come from. I don't know if they got it from their own fire they made, somebody else's fire, but he says the fire is to come from off the altar that's made before Jehovah. Impure, unclean worship experiences God's wrath. Now, would this have any impact upon Nadab and Abihu? Well, they're dead. They have nothing else that they can do. But would it have any impact upon anybody else? There's a statement that again is made in verse 3 that this is what Jehovah says, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. Watch this in verse 8. Jehovah spoke to Aaron and said, drink no wine, nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when you go into the tent of meeting, that you die not. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may make a distinction between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which Jehovah has spoken unto them by Moses. He is connecting their daily life, if it is unclean or clean, impure or pure, holy or unholy, to their ability to come in before God and worship Him in the tent of meeting. He is not going to allow them to do whatever they want to do and to let their life just be whatever they want that life to be, and then come in here one day and worship me in this tent of meeting and it be all right. You just do whatever you want to. You just drink whatever you want to drink, and it doesn't matter how strong it is. You just drink it and then just come in and do what you want to do because this is what I wanted you to do. Their daily life is impacting their worship. Now, I'm not here to imply any way whatsoever that Nadab and Abihu were participants in strong drink. You can study more about that and research that out, and you can be able to come to that kind of conclusion. But it's their offering of the strange fire that impacts everybody else. So therefore, Cain and Abel's case is what they're doing impacts what they're going to do after they leave. And in this case, what Nadab and Abihu in this case renders itself to where it's an impure worship, but it impacts everybody else around, especially as God commands Aaron to say to the priest. So we've got a few things covered here. But let's go further. Let's talk about everybody. Let's talk about the nation of Israel. Rather than getting into specifics about certain people, let's just talk about the whole nation of Judah. In verse 10 of the book of Isaiah chapter 1, hear the word of Jehovah, the rulers of Sodom, give ear to the law of our God. What unto me is a multitude of sacrifices. What does this mean? Well, isn't this what you wanted? I mean, you go on down through verse 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You got all these things, the new moons and the beast and the lambs and the burnt offerings and these holy days and all these. And then he says in verse 13, I cannot away with this iniquity, he says, and the solemn meeting. I'm weary of bearing you in verse 14. I will hide my eyes from you in verse 15. I will not hear, verse 15. Your hands are full of blood. Why is it that all of a sudden they get this information from God that says, you don't want this? And it's multitudes of sacrifices. This is what you want. But watch what happens in verse 16. He asks of their repentance, wash you, make you clean, put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes, cease to do evil. Learn to do well. Seek justice, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. Now he's talking about their daily life has impacted their worship. You're just doing everything you want to do, however you want to do it, treat people just the way you choose, and then come together and offer some sacrifice. Not just one, but let's do all of these. Just make sure we get them all right. Offer all the prayers. Do all the things that we're supposed to do. Make sure we observe all the feasts. That undefiled, impure life brings about an impure, unclean worship. Even if it is the right way. Even if it is the thing that God appointed. Even if it is what God commanded and assigned. And this is not just for a few people. This is for everybody. For all the people of Judah. Now we've gone from specific people to the whole nation. We're talking about everybody. But let's go to the New Testament. See if there might be a consistent theme in this. Go with me to the book of Matthew chapter 15. Matthew chapter 15. The subject is tradition. Oh, okay, I've heard that before. And the tradition is washing your hands, making sure you wash your hands. And that tradition has come as a result of some man putting into place this process and this means of a ritual to make sure everybody does this. Along with that, though, is their disobedience. In verse 4, God said, honor your father and mother. He that speaks evil as a father and mother, let him die the death. But you say, whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, that wherewith thou mightest have been profited by me is given to God, he shall not honor his father. And you have made void the word of God because of your tradition. So it's not only tradition, but it's also disobedience to the law of God. So therefore, as a result, in verse 8, these people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as their doctrines the precepts of men. Their daily life is impacted, their worship. Oh, it's just tradition. That's just what we've been doing. This is what you should be doing. To the point of disobeying what God says forsaking what they seem to think that they could forsake, and it all be good, and they just go through the motion. But they hold to a tradition, and the key thing is in verse 8, their heart is far from me. Their heart is far from me. Remember that, because we're going to come back to that in just a moment. So even in the simplest of commands that are disobeyed, while holding on to tradition and thinking that all this is going to be okay with God, it's still impure. It's unclean. It's corrupt. It's profane. According to this text here, it is vain in verse 9. But let's go further. In Exodus 32, rather than going through reading all the things that are in Exodus 32, this is where Moses has delayed from coming down to the mountain, and Aaron is petitioned by the people of Israel, "Oh, up, make us gods that will be representing who it was that brought us up out of the land of Egypt." Well, gather all your things, Aaron says, and as they gather all their things, their gold, he smelts them down, and next thing you know, out pops this golden calf. And they start worshiping. And according to what the text says, they were there worshiping, that they were worshiping this golden calf, and they ate and drank and rose up to play. Ate and drank and rose up to play. Something very similar to this happened, even though there wasn't a molten calf that came up. There were people in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 11, beginning in verse 20 to verse 34, that were eating and drinking their own supper. Eating and drinking their own supper, rather than memorializing Jesus' death in the eating of the bread and drinking of the cup. The daily life of the people of Israel impacted what they wanted to worship and how they wanted to worship. The daily life of the people of 1 Corinthians 11, which are the Christians, their daily life is impacting the way they should be worshiping and observing Jesus the Christ that died on the cross. So much so that at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 11, a statement that is made in verse 34, "If any man is hungry, let him eat at home, that your coming together be not unto judgment, and the rest will I set in order whensoever I come." The unclean worship of which these people participated in Exodus 32 as well as 1 Corinthians chapter 11 came as a result of what they were already doing that was impure and defiling their life. Or at least they thought that maybe what was common in their life, in which everybody eats and drinks, and everybody plays, but maybe we can just bring that into worship, and that's okay. Let's just make it a means of an entertainment. Let's just sit down and eat a supper, and that'll be okay. So now we come to realize and understand there's a lot going on here about one's worship impacting their personal life, about what is impacted by others by our worship. And also, the more we do, we think that that's going to be sufficient to God, to where we may just make coming together to worship God just a means of a social engagement, like they did in 1 Corinthians 11. If you go with me to the book of Malachi chapter 1, you will see that what they're doing in Malachi chapter 1 is offering things that are polluted. And then he states it in the New American Standard Version. He talks about this idea of being polluted bread. In verse 7, you offer polluted bread upon mine altar, and you say, wherein have we polluted thee? You connect the idea of pollution or being polluted to things that are unclean, that are corrupt and defiled. And therefore, as a result, at the end of verse 7, the table of the Lord is contemptible, because they offer the blind and the sick and the lame. And they say, well, there's no evil to that. And when you offer it, is it not an evil? Yes. And then, according to what is stated in verse 12, you profane it, that you say the table of Jehovah is polluted and the fruit thereof, even his food is contemptible. You're making impure something that should be pure and holy. But as you go on and read into the book of Malachi, one of the great things about understanding why these things take place is understanding what they're doing in their daily life. Are they pure? Are they holy? Are they clean? Or are they corrupt and defiled and sinful and full of iniquity? Well, in chapter 2, you will see, in verse 10 to verse 16, about all the things that they're doing treacherously against their brother, profaning the covenant of their fathers. Even in verse 14 to verse 16, it's the idea of marriage. Now, why have you dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and the wife of your covenant? And then in verse 17, you weary Jehovah with your words, yet you say, wherein have we wearied him? In that you say, everyone that does evil is good in the sight of Jehovah, and he delights in them. Or where is the God of justice? Or do you see how that their daily life is impacting the way in which they worship? Their impure, unholy, unclean, sinful life is definitely impacting the way in which they serve the Lord. So they're just coming with whatever they want to get and pick it up on the way. Everything's going to be okay. Everything will be fine. We'll just go through it and get it done. The impurity of their life is impacting the possibility of the purity of the worship. But some people think that the purity of worship nullifies anything that's impure in their life. There have been so many discussions and maybe disagreements and things of which people discuss, particularly about all the many acts of worship. And they're valid discussions and worth our attention and time to discuss. However, there are certain things in the foundation and the basics of worship that need to be understood like this before you even get to all the arguments and the debates and the discussions about what needs to go there. Should we do this? Should we do that? And these examples of which we're looking at just declare it very, very clearly. So much so that when you get to the book of Romans, notice with me the book of Romans chapter 1. In Romans, the first chapter, let me go back here. Romans chapter 1, I don't have this up here. I wish I'd put this up here. Romans chapter 1, when these people do what they do in their life, number one, they don't recognize God, and they glorify him not as God. In verse 21, they don't even give him thanks. They're vain in their reasonings. Their senseless heart is darkened. What does that do? What does that lifestyle do to their worship? I'll tell you what it does. In verse 25, for they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. That's what it does to worship. The impure life, the unclean, the wicked, the sinful life is impacting the way that these people worship. It's all about them. It's all about what they like. It's all about what they want. Why can't it be just the way I want it? I mean, what difference does it make? What does it matter that I can do it the way I want to do it? Looking at all these 6 examples that we've already given, there's a difference between, okay, what you do in your worship, how it's going to impact your life. What you do in your life, how it's going to impact your worship. What all of you do is going to impact what everybody sees about you. It's a matter of whether or not you think it's a time to eat and drink and rise up to play. It's a more of a social engagement. Or if this is really coming together to worship God. Or if you're just here to worship and serve the creature. Oh, let's see what he's going to tell us today. Let's see if the singing is going to turn out real good. Let me just give to you 3 things that help us understand what purity in worship is. And the first thing has a lot to do with the heart. The heart in which you worship. That's already been brought up in several other examples. We know in Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. That doesn't mean just when you're out daily living, that is involved in what it is that you're doing right here. Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 21 says, God sees what it is that man's thinking within his heart. It's sincere or it's insincere. It's clean or it's unclean. So if in your heart, let me just say it this way. Well, let me ask you, what is it that you believe in your heart about God? If for example, if there is any If there's doubt, uncertainty, suspicion, that you don't believe in God's promises, if there's something about what's going on in your life about what God is or what God says, and you're not too sure about God, then number one, what is the possibility that you're going to worship God in purity? Number two, what's the possibility that you'll even come to worship God? If there's any doubt about who God is, I mean, what are you going to be thinking? If you're seeking in your heart to be approved of men, then you can get that anywhere. You can get the approval of men anywhere. But if you're looking to seek the approval of God, you can get that in worship. However, what you do prior to you coming to worship and your purity of life has a lot to do with your purity in worship. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands. How many of you, since I started speaking, have checked your phone to see what you've been missing? Or, in your worship, you're checking out to see what God says about what you need to do next? I mean, where is the heart in this? So let me let you think about this real quickly before we go on. Luke chapter 18. The instance of where you've got we know him as the publican and the sinner. There's not a name associated with these people, even though you got a Pharisee. You kind of got a characteristic of one of these men. One's a Pharisee, the other publican. The publican and the Pharisee. No names are mentioned. But they go to the temple to pray. They're doing what they should be doing. The Pharisee stood and prayed in verse 11, said, "Thus, God, I thank thee that I'm not as the rest of men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even this publican. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get." But the publican, standing afar off, would not even so much as lift his head, and his eyes unto heaven, and smote his breast, and said, "God, be thou merciful to me, a sinner." God knows the heart of both of these individuals. And the question is asked, or stated rather, or the statement is made, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone that exalts himself shall be humbled, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. So therefore, the idea of the service to God in life, as well as in worship, has a lot to do with your heart. But then there's this second thing, and that is the honor that's given to God. Honor given to God. We're going to talk a little bit more about this tonight in the book of Acts chapter 2, that these people were continuing steadfastly in all that they were doing. But there is a statement that was made in the book of Acts chapter 17 that when they were gathered together, all those people, and they're worshiping, they were doing something in ignorance. It's stated in verse 23 that their honor was done in ignorance. The honor and respect and worship to God was not there. And all that they were doing in the worshiping of all those idols was impure and sinful and not honoring God. And the way in which people honor God comes as a result of what you see these people doing in their daily life. According to Proverbs 15, verse 8, the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord. And we would think, yeah, that's true. But then he says the prayer of the upright is his delight. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination. The wicked are already doing what they're doing before they're even offering anything as an abomination. It's not that they're just become wicked because they're doing something in their sacrifice as an abomination. They're doing what they're doing. They become an abomination prior to their worship. Even the statement that is made in Proverbs 28, verse 9, one who turns away his ear from the hearing of the law, even his prayer is an abomination. You leave here today and your ear is not attached to wanting to know what God wants you to do in his law, then therefore your prayer is going to be an abomination. Pretty good conclusion that you can come to based on that. Pure lives honor God in his worship. Pretty simple. As a result of that, these people who are honoring God in their life, and they're going to be, as Psalm 122 verse 1 says, I was glad when they said to me, come, let us go to the house of Jehovah. They're ready to come. They're already honoring God in their life, so therefore they're ready to come to where everybody else is honoring God in worship. Maybe we should go back and read again Hebrews chapter 10, verse 22 to verse 25. For the text in verse 22 focuses upon the hope of going to heaven. Go back to the beginning of our lesson. It goes to the hope of going to heaven, and then from that, he says those people who are exhorting one another will do what verse 25 says. They will assemble themselves with the brethren, and they will not forsake. But then we get to this one, and that's how we honor God. How we honor God. Worship is not what you see, is not what you feel, although there is sincerity that needs to be a part of what it is that we're doing, and not solely sincerity, but it's a matter of understanding that this is to be, according to John chapter 4, to be done in spirit and in truth. That's the how. And we're going to talk about that this evening. We're going to talk about the intent and the purpose of worship. And we're going to embark upon Acts 2, and then we'll talk about John chapter 4. Let me just leave you with something here. In John 4 and verse 23, the statement that was made by Jesus to the woman at the well says, God seeks for those people to be his worshipers. He seeks for those people to be his worshipers. Now, if he's seeking for people to be his worshipers, then how are these people going to come in? Or when will they come in? Those people that seek God, according to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, by faith, without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. The person that seeks God in their daily life will come to seek to be worshiping God in spirit and in truth. Therefore, the prerequisite to the individual who wants to be pure in their worship is whether or not they want to be pure in their life. And according to what is stated in Romans chapter 6, we die to sin. We're buried in the water to rise up to walk in newness of life. Purity, holiness, ready to be able to worship God in purity. And if you haven't done that part first, consider doing that and do what's right while together we sing this song.